In the winter of 1946, beneath the ziggurat complex at Eridu in southern Iraq, archaeologist Fuad Safar uncovered a sealed chamber that had remained untouched for over 4,000 years. Inside this chamber, preserved in conditions that defied the deterioration expected from millennia of burial, lay a collection of clay tablets that would fundamentally challenge our understanding of Mesopotamian cosmology. These tablets, catalogued as E-series artifacts in the Iraq Museum's collection, contained references to divine beings that predated the well-known Anunnaki pantheon by epochs so vast that Sumerian scribes struggled to express the time periods involved. The text described these earlier entities as the Ancient Ones, the First Powers, and the Lords of the Deep Time, beings who ruled Earth during periods when the stars themselves occupied different positions in the heavens. What makes these references particularly compelling is their consistent appearance across multiple independent tablet collections, from sites separated by hundreds of kilometers and centuries of time, suggesting they preserve genuine historical traditions rather than later mythological inventions. The mathematical precision with which these texts calculate astronomical cycles, extending millions of years into the past, combined with geological references to landscape features that existed only during specific prehistoric periods, indicates that Sumerian civilization inherited knowledge of Earth's deep history from sources whose origins remain unexplained by conventional archaeology. The evidence we are about to examine spans multiple continents and millennia, drawing connections between fragmentary Mesopotamian references to pre-Anunnaki rulers, Egyptian traditions of divine dynasties that governed before the first human pharaohs, Hindu accounts of previous cosmic cycles, and archaeological discoveries that demonstrate technological capabilities during periods when human civilization supposedly consisted of primitive hunter-gatherers. If this investigation challenges fundamental assumptions about the antiquity and complexity of intelligent life on Earth, the implications extend far beyond academic archaeology to encompass questions about the cyclical nature of civilizational development and the possibility that advanced societies have risen and fallen multiple times throughout Earth's history. The collection of tablets discovered in the sealed Eridu chamber presents a chronological puzzle that conventional Sumerian studies has largely ignored or dismissed as scribal error. Tablet E247 describes a period designated as the time of the first settling when beings called the Igigu Kadishtu, literally translated as the Holy Watchers of old, established the first permanent settlements in the Mesopotamian river valleys during an era when the text explicitly states the land was still emerging from the Great Waters. Geological analysis of the Persian Gulf region confirms that approximately 15,000 years ago, during the final stages of the last ice age, sea levels were significantly lower than present day, exposing vast areas of what is now seabed as habitable land that would have been ideal for early settlement. The chamber where Safar made his discovery extended 28 meters beneath the ziggurat foundation, far deeper than the ceremonial burials and foundation deposits typically found in Mesopotamian temple complexes. The excavation team noted that the chamber walls showed no signs of the typical water infiltration and salt crystallization that affects most underground structures in southern Iraq, suggesting the builders employed preservation techniques that exceeded standard Mesopotamian construction methods. The tablets themselves were arranged in deliberate patterns on stone shelves carved directly into the chamber walls, with the most significant texts positioned at eye level for easy access by someone standing in the center of the room. What sets the Igigu Kadishtu apart from the later Anunnaki pantheon is the explicit temporal distinction made in multiple texts. Tablet E189 states directly that the Holy Watchers of old came to the black-headed people, the Sumerian term for humanity, in the time when the Great Serpent still ruled the waters, a phrase that subsequent passages clarify, refers to a period when the Persian Gulf extended much farther inland than its current boundaries. Modern bathymetric surveys of the Gulf confirm that during periods of lower sea level, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers converged into a single waterway that flowed through what is now seabed for approximately 500 kilometers before reaching the ocean. The tablets describe the Igigu Kadishtu as possessing knowledge of the earth-shaping arts, techniques that enabled them to redirect watercourses, create raised platforms above flood levels, and establish the first irrigation networks in the river valleys. Tablet E302 provides specific technical details about canal construction, including gradient calculations and flow rate management principles that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of hydraulic engineering. The precision of these engineering specifications matches closely with the actual gradients found in archaeological remains of the earliest Mesopotamian irrigation systems, suggesting the text preserves genuine technical knowledge rather than mythological invention. References to the physical appearance of the Igigu Kadishtu appear throughout the Eridu collection, with consistent descriptions that distinguish them from both humans and the later Anunnaki. The texts describe them as beings of great height, who wore garments that shimmered like fish scales, and whose eyes reflected light in darkness like those of deep water creatures. Most significantly, multiple tablets state that these beings could remain underwater for extended periods and built their primary dwellings in the deep places where the waters gather. This aquatic association, combined with references to their emergence from the south, where the waters have no end, suggests the Igigu Kadishtu may have originated from oceanic environments or possessed technologies that enabled extended underwater habitation. The chronological framework provided in the Eridu tablets extends far beyond the conventional Sumerian historical timeline. Tablet E563 describes the Igigu Kadishtu as ruling for a period of 2 Shah times 7, using the Sumerian Shah unit that represents 3,600 years. This calculation yields a total rule duration of 50,400 years, a time span that extends well into the last ice age and encompasses multiple periods of dramatic climate change and sea level fluctuation. The text explicitly connects the end of Igigu Kadishtu dominance with the arrival of what it calls the sky dwellers, beings who descended from above rather than emerging from the waters. The astronomical references embedded within these chronological passages provide independent verification of the claimed antiquity. Tablet E417 describes celestial observations made during the time of the Igigu Kadishtu that include the position of the winter solstice sunrise in the constellation that predates what the Sumerians later called the Great Twins. Computer modelling of precessional cycles confirms that the winter solstice occurred in the region of sky, corresponding to Gemini approximately 14,000 to 12,000 years ago, precisely the period suggested by the geological references to emerging coastlines and retreating ice sheets. The mathematical precision embedded within the Eridu tablets extends beyond simple chronological record-keeping to include detailed astronomical calculations that enable modern researchers to date the described events with unexpected accuracy. Tablet E319 contains references to stellar configurations that specify the position of the spring equinox in the constellation of Gemini, an astronomical condition that last occurred approximately 6,800 years ago according to precessional cycle calculations. However, the same tablet describes this celestial configuration as marking not the beginning, but the final epoch of the Ancient One's rule, suggesting that their governance extended backward through multiple precessional ages spanning tens of thousands of years. The tablet employs a sophisticated mathematical notation system that expresses astronomical cycles using nested ratios and multiplicative relationships rather than simple additive counting. The base unit used for these calculations is the Shah of 3,600 years, but the text describes this period as one complete circuit of the wandering star through the houses of heaven. Modern astronomical analysis confirms that Jupiter, the largest planet visible to naked eye observation, completes approximately 303 orbital cycles in 3,600 years, a relationship that suggests the Shah was originally defined as a specific number of Jupiter orbits rather than an arbitrary time period. Building upon this foundation, Tablet E319 describes the full reign of the Ancient Ones as spanning 7 great circuits plus 4 lesser circuits, terminology that analysis reveals corresponds to 7 precessional ages of approximately 2,160 years, each plus 4 share periods. This calculation yields a total duration of 19,520 years for the Ancient One's governance, extending from approximately 25,000 years ago to roughly 5,500 years before the present. The beginning of this period corresponds closely with the last glacial maximum, when ice sheets reached their greatest extent and sea level stood approximately 120 meters lower than current levels. The stellar observations recorded in these tablets include precise descriptions of constellation positions that enable verification of the claimed dates through astronomical back calculation. Tablet E728 describes the rising of the constellation of the Bull at the spring equinox as marking the beginning of the middle epoch of Ancient One's rule. The precession of the equinoxes, a phenomenon caused by the slow wobble of Earth's axis, causes the position of the Sun at the spring equinox to shift through the zodiacal constellations in a cycle lasting approximately 25,920 years. Astronomical calculations confirm that the spring equinox occurred in Taurus, corresponding to the Sumerian bull constellation, between approximately 4,300 and 1,800 BC, with the midpoint of this period falling around 3000 BC. However, the tablet explicitly states this Taurus equinox marked the middle epoch, rather than the beginning or end of Ancient One's governance, requiring that their rule extended both significantly before and after this astronomical marker. Working backward from the Taurus equinox period, the previous equinoctial age occurred in Gemini from approximately 6,800 to 4,300 BC, while the age before that placed the equinox in Cancer from approximately 9,300 to 6,800 BC. The tablet's reference to 7 great circuits extending backward from the final epoch suggests the Ancient One's rule began during the precessional age, when the spring equinox occurred in Scorpio, a period lasting from approximately 17,000 to 15,000 BC. The precision of these astronomical references is reinforced by tablet E941, which describes observations of what it calls the fixed point of heaven, the celestial pole around which all stars appear to rotate. Due to Earth's axial precession, the position of the celestial pole shifts over time, causing different stars to serve as pole stars during different epochs. The tablet identifies the star that marked the celestial pole during the early period of Ancient One's rule as being located in the region between the Dragon and the Little Bear, a description that corresponds precisely to the position of the North Celestial Pole approximately 15,000 years ago. Additional astronomical data preserved in these tablets includes references to planetary positions and lunar cycle calculations that demonstrate sophisticated observational capabilities and mathematical processing. Tablet E635 contains eclipse prediction tables that account for the Saros cycle, an eclipse repetition period of 18 years, 11 days, 8 hours, that results from the complex interaction between the Moon's orbital period, Earth's orbital period, and the precession of the lunar orbital plane. The tablet presents these calculations without explanation, suggesting the astronomical knowledge was inherited from earlier sources rather than developed through contemporary observation. The Palermo Stone, a basalt stela dating to the 5th dynasty, but preserving much older traditions, contains the most complete Egyptian chronology of divine and semi-divine rulers who governed Egypt before the unification under human pharaohs. The sections describing the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus, present these beings as inheritors of an even more ancient divine legacy rather than the original founders of Egyptian civilization. References within the text to the time of the god-kings who came before describe rulers whose reigns are measured in periods that Egyptian chronologists have struggled to interpret, with some readings suggesting individual reigns of thousands of years. The Palermo Stone, currently divided between museums in Palermo, Cairo, London, and several private collections, originally stood over 2 meters in height and approximately 60 centimeters in width. The surviving fragments preserve portions of a comprehensive chronological record that begins with pre-dynastic divine rulers and extends through the early dynasties of human pharaohs. The divine rulers section, though fragmentary, clearly distinguishes between multiple categories of supernatural governance, including the Netjeru or full gods, the Shemsu Hor or followers of Horus, and an earlier category whose name is only partially preserved but appears to reference primordial creator beings. The chronological system employed in the divine rulers section differs substantially from the annual records used for human pharaohs. While the human dynasties are tracked using specific regnal years tied to agricultural cycles and administrative events, the divine rulers section employs a measurement unit called Hennu, a term that appears in other Egyptian texts with astronomical connotations. Analysis by Egyptologist Flinders Petrie in the early 20th century suggested the Hennu might represent a period of approximately 120 years, though other scholars have proposed alternative interpretations ranging from 60 to 500 years per unit. Working from Petrie's interpretation, the Palermo Stone attributes to the Shemsu Hor a combined rule of 13,860 Hennu, yielding a total duration of over 1,600,000 years, if each Henu represents 120 years. While these numbers have led most modern Egyptologists to dismiss the divine chronology as purely mythological, the mathematical precision with which the periods are recorded and their consistent appearance across multiple copies of Egyptian king lists suggests they encode actual information using a system modern researchers have not fully deciphered. The fragmentary nature of the surviving sections makes complete analysis difficult, but certain patterns emerge from careful study. The text consistently distinguishes between different categories of divine rulers using specific grammatical constructions and titulary formulas. The earliest rulers, designated with hieroglyphic determinatives suggesting primordial creation forces, are associated with the shaping of the land itself and the establishment of cosmic order. The subsequent Neteru category includes the well-known divine figures of Egyptian mythology such as Ra, Shu, Geb, and Osiris, beings who governed during what the texts describe as the ordered time when heaven and earth maintained their proper separation. The Shemsu Hor occupy an intermediate position between the full gods and human rulers, described as beings who walked among men but retained divine knowledge and extended lifespans. The Edfu temple texts, which preserve parallel chronological traditions, describe the Shemsu Hor as the 7 sages who arrived in Egypt after a great catastrophe, destroyed the homeland of the gods. These texts explicitly state that the sages brought with them the knowledge of the former time and established new sacred sites according to the pattern of the primordial mounds that emerge from the waters of creation. Recent underwater archaeological surveys off the coast of Gujarat, India, have revealed structural remains at depths indicating submersion occurred during the sea level rise that followed the last glacial maximum approximately 12,000 years ago. These structures, discovered during marine archaeological expeditions between 2000 and 2008, demonstrate construction techniques including precisely fitted stone blocks and sophisticated drainage systems that exceed the documented capabilities of known civilizations from that period. The architectural principles evident in these submerged ruins show remarkable consistency with much later Harappan urban planning, suggesting the preservation and transmission of advanced building knowledge across millennia. The primary site, designated as Underwater Archaeological Site GC1 by the National Institute of Oceanography, lies at depths ranging from 20 to 40 meters below current sea level off the coast near the modern town of Dwarka. Side-scan sonar surveys conducted in 2001 revealed linear structural features extending over an area of approximately 9 square kilometers, with individual structure complexes measuring up to 200 meters in length. Subsequent underwater excavation and photography documented foundation walls constructed from precisely cut sandstone blocks weighing an estimated 5 to 15 tons each, fitted together using techniques that minimize gaps between adjacent stones. The drainage systems incorporated into these structures demonstrate understanding of hydraulic engineering principles that required sophisticated mathematical calculations and long-term urban planning. Channel gradients maintain consistent slopes that would have ensured proper water flow while preventing erosion, a technical requirement that demands accurate surveying capabilities and knowledge of fluid dynamics. The channels connect to collection basins positioned at strategic intervals, creating an integrated water management system designed to handle both regular drainage needs and occasional flooding events. Carbon dating of pottery fragments, wood samples, and organic materials recovered from the site produced dates ranging from 13,000 to 8,000 years before present, with the majority of samples clustering around 11,000 to 9,000 years ago. These dates correspond to the period of most rapid sea level rise following the last glacial maximum, when melting ice sheets returned vast quantities of water to the oceans and caused coastlines worldwide to retreat inland at rates that would have been observable within single human lifetimes. The architectural style evident in the underwater structures shows specific features that appear centuries later in the mature Harappan civilization of the Indus Valley. Both employ standardized brick sizes, incorporate right-angle street layouts, utilize covered drainage channels, and position larger buildings on raised platforms to provide protection from flooding. The consistency of these design elements across such vast temporal separation requires either independent invention of identical solutions or transmission of architectural knowledge through some form of cultural continuity that survived the intervening millennia. Hindu cosmological texts preserve detailed accounts of previous cosmic cycles called Manvantaras, each lasting approximately 306 million years and governed by different manus or progenitors of humanity. The Vishnu Purana describes the current age as the 7th Manvantara, implying 6 previous cycles of human development and destruction. What distinguishes these Hindu accounts from simple mythological timekeeping is their incorporation of specific astronomical, geological, and biological details that correspond to actual planetary conditions during different epochs of Earth's history. The Vishnu Purana, composed in its current form during the Gupta period but preserving much older oral traditions, provides detailed descriptions of each Manvantara that go far beyond simple chronological listing. Each cycle is characterized by specific astronomical conditions, dominant life forms, technological capabilities, and eventual destruction mechanisms that show remarkable sophistication in their categorization of different types of civilizational development and collapse. The text explicitly states that each Manvantara represents not merely a change in divine administration, but a fundamental reset of planetary conditions and biological possibilities. The first Manvantara, governed by Svayambhuva Manu, is described as the age when the Earth was still forming its solid surface, and when life existed primarily in subtle, rather than dense material forms. The Purana describes beings during this age as possessing bodies composed of light and thought rather than gross matter, existing in conditions where the boundaries between physical and spiritual realms remained fluid. While this description appears purely mythological, it bears striking resemblance to conditions that would have prevailed during Earth's early formation, when surface temperatures, atmospheric composition, and geological activity differed radically from current conditions. The subsequent Manvantaras are described with progressively more physical detail, suggesting increasing materialization of life forms and stabilization of planetary conditions. The fourth Manvantara, ruled by Tamasa Manu, receives particular attention in the text for its description of great cities built by Daityas and Danavas, races of powerful beings who possessed advanced knowledge of architecture, astronomy, and warfare. The Purana describes their destruction through a combination of internal warfare and external catastrophe, involving what it terms a rain of fire from the heavens and the submersion of their greatest cities beneath rising waters. The mathematical precision of the Manvantara chronology extends beyond the headline figure of 306 million years to include detailed subdivisions and astronomical correlations. Each Manvantara is divided into 71 Mahayugas, with each Mahayuga consisting of 4 yugas totaling 4,320,000 years. The proportions between these different time periods follow consistent mathematical ratios that appear throughout Hindu cosmological calculations, suggesting they represent a coherent system rather than arbitrary time periods. The megalithic complex at Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, excavated by Klaus Schmidt beginning in 1995, demonstrates architectural sophistication and organizational capabilities that fundamentally challenge conventional timelines of human social development. The site's earlier structures, dating to approximately 9500 BC, feature massive T-shaped limestone pillars weighing up to 20 tons, precisely carved with complex iconographic programs depicting animals, abstract symbols, and anthropomorphic figures. The level of planning, specialized labor, and technical knowledge required for this construction indicates the presence of sophisticated social structures and accumulated knowledge systems during a period when human civilization supposedly consisted of scattered bands of nomadic hunter-gatherers. The site occupies a prominent hilltop position overlooking the Harran Plain in what is now southeastern Turkey, approximately 15 kilometers northeast of the modern city of Sanliurfa. The artificial mound rises 15 meters above the surrounding plateau and covers an area of approximately 9 hectares, though geophysical surveys suggest that excavated areas represent less than 5% of the total site. Ground-penetrating radar and magnetometry surveys have revealed at least 20 additional circular and oval structures buried beneath the surface, indicating that Göbekli Tepe represents a far more extensive complex than the currently visible remains suggest. The excavated structures consist of circular and oval enclosures defined by massive T-shaped limestone pillars arranged in concentric rings. The largest enclosures, designated as complexes C and D by the excavation team, measure approximately 20 to 30 meters in diameter and contain central pillars that stand over 5 meters in height above floor level, with an additional 3 meters of shaft buried in the bedrock foundation. These central pillars are surrounded by smaller but still substantial pillars positioned around the enclosure perimeter, creating architectural spaces that could have accommodated gatherings of hundreds of individuals. The technical sophistication evident in pillar production and installation exceeds what should have been possible for pre-agricultural societies using stone tools. The pillars were quarried from limestone bedrock exposed on the hillside approximately 200 meters from the main enclosures, using techniques that created smooth vertical surfaces and precisely angled corners. Analysis of quarrying marks indicates the builders employed a combination of percussion and cutting methods that removed stone in controlled fashion, creating pillar blanks that required minimal finishing work after extraction from the bedrock matrix. Transportation of these massive pillars from quarry to installation site would have required coordinated labour forces numbering in the hundreds, along with knowledge of leverage, friction reduction, and load distribution principles. Experimental archaeology conducted by teams attempting to replicate the transport methods using period-appropriate technology demonstrated that moving a 20-ton pillar even short distances required sophisticated wooden sledges, roller systems, and lubrication techniques. The precision with which pillars were positioned within the enclosures, maintaining consistent spacing and alignment despite their massive weight, suggests the use of surveying methods and construction planning that conventional archaeology attributes to much later civilizations. The iconographic program carved into the pillars represents one of the most complex symbolic systems known from the pre-literate world. The carvings depict a menagerie of animals including lions, bulls, boars, foxes, gazelles, donkeys, snakes, birds, insects, and arachnids, rendered with anatomical accuracy and artistic skill that indicates close observation and sophisticated carving techniques. Many pillars feature multiple animal species arranged in carefully composed scenes that suggest narrative or symbolic relationships rather than random decoration. Beyond the animal imagery, numerous pillars display abstract symbols, including H-shaped forms, crescents, circles, and geometric patterns whose meanings remain undeciphered. The consistency with which certain symbol combinations appear across different pillars and enclosures suggests they constitute elements of a coherent symbolic system, possibly representing an early form of proto-writing or mnemonic device for preserving complex information. The most enigmatic symbols are the anthropomorphic features carved on the central pillars, including arms, hands, and items of clothing that transform the pillars into stylized representations of human or humanoid figures. The question of who built Göbekli Tepe and how they organized the massive labor investment required presents profound challenges to conventional models of Neolithic social organization. The site predates agriculture, permanent settlements, and pottery production in the region by at least a millennium, yet its construction required planning horizons, resource mobilization, and specialized skill development typically associated with complex agricultural societies. Schmidt proposed that Göbekli Tepe functioned as a ritual center where dispersed hunter-gatherer groups gathered periodically for ceremonies and communal activities, with the construction itself serving as a binding force that created social cohesion across multiple communities. The deliberate burial of the site adds another layer of mystery to its interpretation. Around 8200 BC, the enclosures were systematically filled with debris and soil, preserving the structures in nearly pristine condition but removing them from active use. This burial was not gradual abandonment but intentional decommissioning, with thousands of tons of fill material transported to the site and carefully deposited to cover the pillars and architectural features. The reasons for this deliberate burial remain unknown, though some researchers have proposed it reflects a fundamental shift in religious practices or the arrival of new populations with different sacred traditions. Fragmentary Akkadian texts from the Library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh contain references to beings designated as the Banayu Shanati, translated as the builders of ancient years, who are credited with constructing the first great cities during epochs before the Anunnaki descended to Earth. Tablet K6324 describes these builders as possessing knowledge of stonework that enabled them to shape massive blocks as though they were soft clay, and to transport stones of tremendous weight through methods the text cryptically describes as singing to the earth spirits. The tablet, discovered during Hormuz Rassam's excavations at Nineveh between 1852 and 1854, forms part of a larger series dealing with ancient architectural knowledge and temple construction techniques. The section referencing the Banayu Shanati appears within a longer passage that describes the proper methods for founding sacred buildings suggesting that later Mesopotamian temple architects viewed these ancient builders as authorities whose techniques should be preserved and emulated. The text explicitly distinguishes the Banayu Shanati from both human builders and the later Anunnaki, identifying them as a separate category of beings who possess specialized technical knowledge. The phrase describing their ability to shape stone as soft clay has typically been dismissed as poetic exaggeration, yet similar descriptions appear in multiple independent sources from different periods and cultures. Akkadian hymns to the god Ea describe his ability to soften stone through incantations, while Egyptian texts reference the god Ptah's capacity to shape limestone through the power of speech. The consistency of these descriptions across cultures that had limited direct contact suggests they may preserve memories of actual stoneworking techniques that modern civilization has not rediscovered. The reference to singing to the earth spirits as a method of stone transportation presents an even more intriguing puzzle. The Akkadian term translated as singing carries connotations of rhythmic sound production and vibrational resonance, rather than simple melodic singing. Mesopotamian magical texts frequently describe the use of specific sound patterns and rhythmic chanting to accomplish various effects, suggesting that Mesopotamian culture retained traditions of acoustic technologies that utilize sound vibration for practical purposes. Modern acoustic research has demonstrated that certain frequency combinations can indeed affect material properties and even levitate small objects through acoustic pressure, lending credence to the possibility that ancient cultures may have developed sophisticated applications of sound technology. Tablet K6324 describes specific construction projects attributed to the Banayu Shanati, including the founding of Eridu during the time when the land was still soft from the waters. This temporal reference connects the builders of ancient years to the same geological period described in the Eridu tablets, suggesting that multiple independent textual traditions preserved memories of construction activities during the post-glacial period when rising sea levels were transforming the geography of the Persian Gulf region. The text states that the builders established 7 primary cities at locations chosen for their alignment with the paths of heaven, terminology that indicates astronomical orientation in site selection. The architectural techniques attributed to the Banayu Shanati include the creation of foundation platforms that would resist earthquake damage, the construction of drainage systems that channel water according to natural flow patterns, and the orientation of buildings to capture beneficial energies from celestial bodies. These technical specifications align closely with features found in the earliest archaeological levels at major Mesopotamian sites, suggesting the text preserved genuine construction knowledge rather than mythological invention. The reference to earthquake-resistant foundations is particularly significant, given that southern Mesopotamia lies in a relatively stable tectonic region, implying that the original builders developed these techniques in locations subject to more frequent seismic activity. The tablet concludes with a lament that the knowledge of the Banayu Shanati has been lost, except for fragments preserved in the builder guilds and temple workshops. This acknowledgement of knowledge loss provides crucial context for interpreting the text, indicating that even in Ashurbanipal's time during the 7th century BC, scribes recognized they possessed only incomplete versions of much older technical traditions. The preservation of these fragmentary references in the royal library suggests that Assyrian rulers valued ancient architectural knowledge and attempted to collect and maintain whatever remnants survived from earlier periods. Geological analysis of the Great Sphinx of Giza by Robert Scholl, beginning in 1991, revealed erosion patterns on the Sphinx enclosure that are characteristic of prolonged exposure to heavy rainfall, rather than the wind and sand erosion that has affected other monuments on the Giza Plateau. Given that the climate of the Giza region has been predominantly arid for the past 5,000 years, the presence of water erosion patterns suggests the Sphinx was carved during a period when the area experienced significantly higher rainfall, conditions that last prevailed in Egypt during the period from 10,000 to 5,000 BC. Schock, a geologist from Boston University, was invited to examine the Sphinx by John Anthony West, who had proposed that the monument's weathering patterns indicated far greater antiquity than the conventional dating to the 4th dynasty reign of Khafre around 2500 BC. Schock's geological survey focused on the vertical fissures and undulating horizontal surfaces visible on the limestone walls of the Sphinx enclosure, the pit from which the Sphinx body was carved. These weathering patterns differ dramatically from the horizontal banding and granular disintegration that characterizes wind and sand erosion on other Giza monuments of known age. The vertical fissuring observed on the Sphinx enclosure walls forms through precipitation-induced weathering, where rainwater exploits natural weaknesses in the limestone bedding planes and creates deep vertical channels through repeated cycles of wetting and drying. The depth and configuration of these fissures on the Sphinx enclosure walls indicates prolonged exposure to substantial rainfall over extended time periods, weathering that would require thousands of years of precipitation, at rates far exceeding those experienced in the Giza region during the historical period. Control comparisons with other Giza monuments demonstrate that structures known to date from the Old Kingdom period display minimal vertical fissuring, and instead show primarily horizontal weathering bands characteristic of wind abrasion and salt crystallization. The western end of the Sphinx enclosure shows the most pronounced weathering effects, with vertical fissures extending up to 2 meters deep into the limestone walls. The eastern end, which includes the Sphinx Temple and Valley Temple, displays less severe weathering, but still shows precipitation patterns inconsistent with the arid conditions that have prevailed since the Old Kingdom period. The differential weathering between the western and eastern sections likely reflects differences in limestone quality and exposure duration, with the western section possibly representing earlier excavation phases subjected to longer weathering periods. Climatic data from multiple sources confirms that the Giza region experienced significantly higher rainfall during the early to middle Holocene period. Paleoclimatic reconstruction based on Nile flood records, pollen analysis from lake sediments, and speleothem growth patterns from cave formations indicates that northeastern Africa underwent a humid phase from approximately 9000 to 5000 BC, when the region received annual rainfall amounts several times higher than current levels. This African humid period transformed the Sahara into a landscape dotted with lakes and supporting extensive grasslands and woodlands, conditions that would have provided ample rainfall to create the observed weathering patterns on the Sphinx enclosure. The conventional dating of the Sphinx to Khafra's reign rests primarily on stylistic interpretation of the Sphinx head as depicting Khafra's facial features and on the architectural association between the Sphinx temple and Khafra's Valley Temple. However, numerous Egyptologists have noted that the Sphinx head appears disproportionately small relative to the massive leonine body, suggesting the head may represent a later recarving of an originally larger head that had suffered erosion damage. If the head was indeed recarved during the 4th dynasty, the weathering evidence could indicate that the Sphinx body dates to the earlier humid period, while the current head represents Khafra's modification of a pre-existing monument. The implications of Schocher's geological analysis extend beyond the dating of a single monument, to encompass broader questions about the antiquity of Egyptian civilization and the possibility of pre-dynastic advanced cultures. If the Sphinx weathering reflects genuine precipitation-induced erosion, requiring thousands of years of exposure during the humid period, then sophisticated stone carving capabilities existed in the Nile Valley during periods when conventional archaeology places only primitive Neolithic cultures. The astronomical alignments incorporated into the Giza complex provide additional support for greater antiquity, as computer modelling demonstrates that the Sphinx gazes directly at its celestial counterpart Leo during the spring equinox sunrise, as it appeared approximately 10,500 BC. The Piri Reis map, compiled in 1513 by the Ottoman admiral and cartographer, incorporates source materials that the admiral himself acknowledged dated to much earlier periods, including maps that allegedly originated from the time of Alexander the Great. The map's depiction of the Antarctic coastline shows geographical features that match the subglacial topography of Antarctica, as revealed by modern seismic surveys, including mountain ranges and river valleys that are currently buried beneath kilometers of ice. The accuracy of these coastal details suggests that the original source maps were created during a period when Antarctica was not completely ice-covered, conditions that last existed millions of years ago according to conventional glaciology. The surviving fragment of the Piri Reis map, currently housed in the Topkapi Palace Museum in Istanbul, represents approximately 1/3 of the original world map that Piri Reis created. The fragment shows the western coasts of Europe and Africa, the eastern coast of South America, and a southern landmass that conventional interpretation identifies as an extended and distorted depiction of the South American coast. However, detailed analysis by Charles Hapgood and his students at Keene State College during the 1950s revealed that when the southern portion of the map is reoriented and adjusted for the projection system employed, It corresponds precisely to the coastline of Queen Maud Land in Antarctica. Piri Reis included extensive marginal notes on his map describing the source materials he consulted during its compilation. These notes reference approximately 20 source maps of varying ages, including 8 Ptolemaic maps from the Classical period, 4 Portuguese maps depicting recent discoveries, 1 Arabic map, and a map he describes as drawn by Columbus. Most significantly, Piri Reis states that some of his sources dated from the time of Alexander the Great in the 4th century BC, suggesting that ancient Greek geographers possessed detailed knowledge of global geography, including regions that European civilization would not officially discover until the 16th century. The Antarctic coastline shown on the Piri Reis map includes details that match the subglacial topography revealed by seismic surveys conducted during the International Geophysical Year in 1957 and 58. The map depicts mountain ranges, coastal bays, and river valleys in positions that correspond to features buried beneath the Antarctic ice sheet, features that were unknown to modern cartography until the development of ice-penetrating radar and seismic reflection techniques. The accuracy of these details cannot be explained by fortunate coincidence or lucky extrapolation from known geography, as the features shown include specific geographical relationships and proportional accuracies that would require actual survey data. The most striking correspondence involves the depiction of the Antarctic Peninsula and the Weddell Sea region, where the Piri Reis map shows a deep bay penetrating the coastline at precisely the location where seismic surveys later revealed a major subglacial basin. The map also depicts an ice-free archipelago in the position where the South Orkney Islands are located, though these islands were not officially discovered until 1821. The coastline configuration matches closely with reconstructions of how Antarctica would appear if the ice sheet were removed or significantly reduced, raising profound questions about how such accurate information could have been available to medieval or ancient cartographers. Conventional glaciology maintains that Antarctica has been ice-covered for at least 14 million years, a timeline that would preclude any human mapping of ice-free coastal features. However, some glaciologists have proposed that periodic fluctuations in ice sheet extent may have exposed coastal regions during warmer intervals, potentially including periods within the time frame of human civilization. Alternative theories suggest that the Antarctic ice sheet may have experienced partial collapse or reorganization events more recently than conventional models allow, possibly during the early Holocene warm period around 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. The projection system employed in the Piri Reis map demonstrates sophisticated mathematical understanding that enables accurate representation of curved Earth surface on flat parchment. Analysis of the map's geometry indicates the use of trigonometric projection methods that account for Earth's spherical shape, techniques that European cartography did not officially develop until the 16th century. The presence of these advanced projection methods in source maps that Piri Reis claims dated to the time of Alexander suggests that ancient Greek geography possessed mathematical cartographic capabilities that have been lost and only recently rediscovered. The Eridu Genesis, while primarily known for its flood narrative, contains prefatory sections that describe the current world as one in a succession of created realms, each destroyed when it became corrupted or when its appointed time reached completion. Tablet CBS 10673 explicitly states that the gods who created the present world were themselves inheritors of creation, knowledge from even more ancient powers who shaped previous Earths. The text describes these previous worlds as having been inhabited by different forms of life, some of which possessed intelligence and civilization before their destruction through various catastrophic mechanisms. The tablet, housed in the University of Pennsylvania Museum, was excavated from Nipper during the 1893 season, and represents one of the oldest creation narratives preserved in cuneiform script. The text dates to the Old Babylonian period around 1700 BC, but clearly draws from much earlier Sumerian sources, as evidenced by the archaic vocabulary and grammatical constructions that appear throughout. The prefatory section describing previous worlds occupies approximately 20% of the preserved text, suggesting it formed an integral part of the creation narrative rather than a minor prologue. The account distinguishes 4 previous worlds that preceded the current creation, each characterized by specific conditions and dominant life forms. The first world is described as the realm of flame and darkness, where beings of fire walked upon molten stone, a description that corresponds remarkably to conditions during Earth's formation, when the surface consisted of magma oceans beneath a dense atmosphere. The text states this world ended when the fires cooled and the beings of flame descended into the depths of the earth, where they remain to this day. A conclusion that parallels geological understanding of planetary differentiation and core formation. The second world receives more detailed description, characterized as the time when waters covered all the land and life existed only in the deep places. The text describes beings who swam through the ancient seas and built cities on the ocean floor, dwelling in palaces of crystal and shell. This world ended when the waters receded and the air became too thin for water-breathing life, forcing the ocean dwellers to retreat to the deepest places or perish on the newly exposed land. The correspondence between this account and the actual history of Earth's oceans suggests the preservation of genuine geological knowledge regarding the transformation of Earth's hydrosphere over geological timescales. The third world is described as the age of great forests, when beings who walked on many legs and flew on leather wings ruled the land. The text provides specific details about the size and characteristics of these creatures, describing beings as tall as mountains who fed on the abundant vegetation and whose thunderous footsteps shook the earth. The destruction of this world occurred through a rain of fire from the heavens that darkened the sky and poisoned the air, causing the great beings to sicken and die, while only small creatures survived by hiding in burrows beneath the ground. This account bears striking resemblance to the asteroid impact and subsequent extinction event that ended the Cretaceous period 65 million years ago. The fourth world receives the most extensive treatment in the text, described as the time of the ancient ones who possessed wisdom and built cities of stone that touched the sky. The text indicates these beings had mastered fire, metal, and the secret of capturing lightning to do their bidding. Their civilization spanned the entire Earth, and they had begun to explore the paths that lead beyond the sky realm when their world was destroyed through a combination of their own hubris and divine judgment. The text describes catastrophes including the shaking of the Earth's foundations, the drowning of great lands beneath rising seas, and the falling of stars from heaven that burned the cities and turned day into night. The transition from the fourth world to the current fifth world is described as occurring after a period of darkness and chaos, during which the Earth's surface was reshaped and new forms of life emerged from the survivors of the previous age. The text states that the Anunnaki descended to survey the ruined Earth and determined it was suitable for establishing a new creation, but that they found remnant populations who preserved fragments of the Ancient One's knowledge. These survivors taught the newly created humans the basic arts of civilization, serving as intermediaries between the departed Ancient Ones and the Anunnaki, who would govern the new age. The mathematical precision with which the tablet describes the time period separating these successive worlds suggests the account preserves astronomical calculations rather than arbitrary mythological invention. The text indicates that each world endures for specific periods tied to celestial cycles, including the precession of the equinoxes, the orbital periods of planets, and longer stellar cycles involving the movement of the Sun through the galaxy. These temporal markers enable correlation between the mythological world ages and actual geological epochs, supporting the interpretation that the text encodes genuine knowledge of Earth's deep history, transmitted through oral tradition and eventually committed to writing by Sumerian scribes. The stone blocks at Pumapunku, part of the larger Tiahuanaco complex in Bolivia, demonstrate machining precision that approaches modern manufacturing tolerances. Andesite blocks weighing up to 130 tons show perfectly flat surfaces extending across several meters, internal right angles accurate to within a few arc minutes, and complex interlocking joints that require three-dimensional precision in cutting. Analysis by structural engineers has confirmed that achieving this level of accuracy in andesite, one of the hardest stones used in ancient construction, would require diamond-tipped tools and precision measuring equipment. The site sits at an elevation of approximately 3,850 meters above sea level on the Altiplano Plateau near the southern shore of Lake Titicaca in modern Bolivia. The complex consists of multiple architectural elements, including a terraced platform mound, courtyard structures, and scattered megalithic blocks that show evidence of sophisticated stoneworking techniques. Archaeological dating based on ceramic analysis and radiocarbon measurements places the primary construction phase between 500 and 700 AD, though some researchers have proposed much earlier dates, based on astronomical alignments and geological evidence. The precision of the stone cutting becomes apparent through detailed measurement and analysis of the preserved blocks. Researcher Jean-Pierre Protzen conducted extensive studies of Pumapunku stonework during the 1980s and documented flatness tolerances of less than 1 mm across surface areas exceeding 2 square meters. This level of precision requires not only advanced cutting tools, but also sophisticated measuring and verification equipment capable of detecting minute surface irregularities. The stone surfaces show no evidence of the pecking and grinding marks that characterize stoneworking with primitive tools, instead displaying smooth finished surfaces that suggest advanced cutting technologies. The internal angles formed by intersecting stone surfaces demonstrate similarly remarkable precision. Measurements using precision squares and laser alignment tools have confirmed that many corners maintain 90-degree angles, accurate to within 2 to 3 arc minutes, equivalent to approximately 0.03 to 0.05 degrees of deviation. Achieving this level of angular accuracy requires precise three-dimensional control during cutting and finishing operations, capabilities that exceed the documented tool technology available to Tiahuanaco culture. The consistency of these tolerances across multiple blocks indicates systematic quality control rather than occasional fortunate results. The most enigmatic features at Pumapunku are the complex interlocking joints that connected different stone elements into stable structural assemblies. These joints include H-shaped channels, precise mortise and tenon connections, and intricate grooves that held metal clamps or structural connectors. The three-dimensional geometry of these joints required that stone-cutting operations maintain precise alignment across multiple surfaces and orientations, a technical challenge that demands sophisticated fabrication planning and execution. Many joints incorporate features that would have been invisible once assembled, suggesting the builders possessed detailed construction drawings or templates that specified exact dimensions for hidden structural elements. The hardness of andesite stone compounds the technical mystery of Pumapunku construction. Andesite ranks between 6.0 and 7.0 on the Mohs hardness scale, making it significantly harder than steel tools and difficult to work even with modern carbide cutting implements. Traditional copper and bronze tools would have been ineffective for precise cutting of andesite, while stone percussion tools would have created irregular surfaces and uncontrolled fracture patterns inconsistent with the observed precision. The absence of tool marks on finished surfaces suggests the use of cutting methods that remove material without creating the microscopic scratches and gouges that characterize conventional sawing and grinding operations. Transportation and placement of the massive stone blocks presents additional technical challenges that conventional explanations struggle to address. The nearest andesite quarries lie approximately 15 kilometers from Pumapunku, across terrain that includes significant elevation changes and the crossing of the Tiahuanaco River. Moving 130-ton blocks across this distance would have required engineering capabilities comparable to modern heavy construction equipment, including robust transportation infrastructure and sophisticated lifting and positioning equipment. The precision with which blocks were positioned relative to one another suggests the use of surveying instruments and alignment techniques that ensured accurate placement despite the massive weights involved. Recent analysis has revealed that some Pumapunku blocks incorporate features that suggest knowledge of acoustic or resonance phenomena. Certain stone elements contain precisely carved channels and chambers that create distinct resonance frequencies when struck or when air flows through them. These acoustic properties appear intentional rather than incidental, raising questions about whether the structures served functions beyond simple architectural support. Research into the acoustic characteristics of megalithic sites worldwide has documented similar resonance features at locations ranging from Newgrange in Ireland to the temples of Malta, suggesting the possibility of shared knowledge systems focused on sound and vibration. The Edfu building texts, carved into the walls of the Temple of Horus at Edfu during the Ptolemaic period, but explicitly citing much older sources, describe the Zep Tepi or First Time as an epoch when divine beings established the foundational principles of Egyptian civilization. The texts indicate that during this primordial period, 7 sages arrived in Egypt and established sacred mounds at specific locations, creating the original temples according to plans that descended from the sky. The precision with which these texts describe astronomical alignments and geographical relationships between different sacred sites demonstrates sophisticated knowledge of Egyptian geography and celestial mechanics. The Edfu texts were inscribed on the temple walls during the reigns of Ptolemy Eb through Ptolemy the, spanning the period from approximately 180 to 50 BC. However, the hieroglyphic inscriptions explicitly identify their sources as ancient papyri dating from the time of the followers of Horus and earlier divine dynasties. The texts describe themselves as preserving knowledge from the Library of Souls, a repository of sacred wisdom that predated the construction of any temple. The scribes who compiled these inscriptions clearly distinguish between their contemporary work and the ancient sources they were copying, suggesting genuine transmission of older material rather than Ptolemaic invention. The account of the Zep Tepe begins with descriptions of primordial waters covering the earth and the emergence of the first solid ground in the form of sacred mounds. The texts identify specific geographical locations where these primordial mounds emerged, including sites that would later become major temple centers, such as Heliopolis, Memphis, and Edfu itself. The precision with which these locations are specified, including references to their positions relative to the Nile floodplain and their orientations towards specific celestial phenomena, indicates detailed geographical knowledge of the entire Nile Valley. The 7 sages who arrived during the Zep Tepe are described as divine beings possessing wisdom from the previous world, knowledge that enabled them to establish civilization according to cosmic principles. The texts provide names for these sages and describe their specific contributions to Egyptian culture, including the establishment of writing, the creation of the calendar, the foundation of astronomical observation, and the teaching of agricultural techniques. Each sage is associated with specific temple sites and credited with establishing the architectural and ritual traditions that would characterize those locations throughout Egyptian history. The temple construction plans described in the Edfu texts incorporate sophisticated astronomical alignments that require detailed knowledge of celestial mechanics and long-term observational data. The texts specify that temples should be oriented according to the rising positions of specific stars, with particular attention to stellar events that occurred during the Zep Tepe and would repeat during future precessional cycles. The mathematical precision required to calculate these alignments and project them forward through multiple precessional ages indicates astronomical capabilities, far exceeding what conventional Egyptology attributes to early dynastic or pre-dynastic cultures. The geographical relationships between different temple sites described in the Edfu texts demonstrate understanding of the entire Egyptian landscape as an integrated sacred geography. The texts describe how temples at different locations were positioned to create geometric patterns that reflected celestial configurations, with distances between sites encoding mathematical relationships and astronomical constants. Modern surveys using satellite positioning and geographic information systems have confirmed many of these described relationships, revealing that major temple sites do indeed form geometric patterns that incorporate proportions related to fundamental mathematical constants and astronomical cycles. The texts explicitly state that the knowledge preserved in temple architecture and ritual practices originated from divine sources during the Zep Tepe and was maintained through carefully structured priesthoods across thousands of years. The emphasis on preservation and transmission of ancient knowledge suggests that later Egyptian civilization understood itself as inheriting, rather than creating its fundamental cultural principles. The detailed descriptions of how knowledge should be protected, copied, and transmitted to future generations indicate sophisticated understanding of information preservation across extended time periods. References to the destruction that ended the previous world appear throughout the Edfu texts, describing catastrophic events that drowned the original homeland of the gods and forced the migration of divine wisdom keepers to Egypt. The texts describe a great inundation that covered the ancestral lands and required the divine survivors to establish new, sacred sites in the Nile Valley. These flood traditions parallel accounts from Mesopotamian, Hindu, and other ancient sources, suggesting the preservation of memories of actual catastrophic events that affected multiple regions during the transition from the last ice age to the current interglacial period. The megalithic stone circle at Nabta Playa in the Nubian desert, excavated by teams led by Fred Wendorf beginning in 1974, dates to approximately 4800 BC, making it one of the oldest known astronomical structures in the world. The arrangement of stones creates alignments with the summer solstice sunrise and tracks the heliacal rising of specific stars with precision that indicates sophisticated astronomical knowledge and long-term observational programs. The mathematical relationships encoded in the circle's geometry include references to precessional cycles, suggesting that the builders understood astronomical phenomena that require centuries of continuous observation to detect. The site is located approximately 100 kilometers west of Abu Simbel in the Nubian desert, in a region that during the early to middle Holocene supported seasonal lakes and grasslands that attracted nomadic populations. The stone circle and associated megalithic features occupy a playa basin that collected water during occasional rainfall events, creating a temporary lake that would have served as an important resource for human and animal populations in the region. Archaeological evidence indicates seasonal occupation of the site from approximately 7500 to 3500 BC, with the megalithic construction occurring during the latter portion of this occupation period. The main stone circle consists of approximately 30 megalithic slabs arranged in an oval pattern, measuring approximately 4 meters by 3.6 meters. The stones range in size from small markers weighing a few kilograms to larger slabs exceeding 1 ton, with the larger stones positioned at astronomically significant locations within the circle. Additional megalithic features in the vicinity include alignments of standing stones, buried megaliths, and complex arrangements of stones that form sight lines toward specific horizon positions. Analysis of the circle's astronomical alignments was conducted by J. McKim Malville of the University of Colorado and other archaeoastronomers who documented multiple significant celestial correlations. The most prominent alignment orients toward the summer solstice sunrise, with a pair of stones creating a sightline that would have framed the sun as it rose on the longest day of the year. This alignment would have enabled the determination of the exact date of the summer solstice, providing a precise calendar marker for seasonal activities including the timing of migrations, plantings, and ceremonial gatherings. Beyond the solstice alignment, the Nabta Playa circle incorporates markers that track the heliacal rising of Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky, and a celestial object of particular significance to ancient Egyptian cultures. The heliacal rising of Sirius, when the star first becomes visible on the eastern horizon, just before sunrise after a period of invisibility, occurred in early to mid-July during the period when the Nabta Playa circle was constructed. This celestial event coincided closely with the annual flooding of the Nile River in Egypt, making it a crucial calendar marker for agricultural planning and water resource management. The geometric relationships encoded in the stone circle's layout reveal mathematical sophistication that extends beyond simple astronomical alignment to incorporate complex proportional systems and numerical relationships. Analysis by Thomas Brophy documented that the positions of certain stones within the circle correspond to the relative positions of stars in the Orion constellation, as they appeared approximately 4800 BC, with the spacing between stones encoding information about stellar brightnesses and relative positions. This correlation suggests the circle functioned as a three-dimensional star map that preserved astronomical data in permanent stone markers. The most remarkable aspect of the Nabta Playa circle is its apparent encoding of precessional information. The arrangement includes features that correlate with stellar positions from different precessional epochs, suggesting the builders understood that star positions change over time due to the precession of Earth's axis. Detecting and measuring precessional motion requires continuous astronomical observation, spanning multiple generations, as the precession cycle completes one full rotation approximately every 25,920 years. The incorporation of precessional data into a stone circle, constructed in 4800 BC, indicates astronomical knowledge systems that began accumulating observational data thousands of years earlier. The cultural context of Nabta Playa connects the site to populations that may have migrated into the Nile Valley, as the Sahara underwent desertification during the mid-Holocene. The astronomical knowledge preserved in the stone circle could represent cultural traditions that these populations brought with them to Egypt, potentially contributing to the sophisticated astronomical capabilities evident in later pharaonic civilization. The continuity of astronomical symbolism between Nabta Playa and later Egyptian monuments supports the hypothesis of knowledge transmission from pre-dynastic populations to the civilizations that emerged along the Nile. The Babylonian creation epic Numa Elish, while primarily focused on the rise of Marduk to supremacy among the gods, contains references in its opening tablets to older divine generations who existed before the Anunnaki achieved dominance. The text describes primordial beings, including Apsu and Tiamat, as personifications of fundamental cosmic forces who gave birth to successive generations of deities. What distinguishes these accounts from simple theogonic mythology is the inclusion of specific chronological markers and astronomical references that suggest the text preserves traditions of actual historical transitions between different ruling powers. The Enuma Elish survives in multiple copies dating primarily to the 1st millennium BC, with the most complete version preserved on 7 cuneiform tablets discovered at Ashurbanipal's library at Nineveh. The composition of the epic is generally dated to the late 2nd millennium BC during the Kassite or early Babylonian period, though many scholars recognize that it incorporates much older Sumerian and Akkadian mythological material. The text functioned as the ritual recitation performed during the Babylonian New Year festival, suggesting its central importance to Mesopotamian religious and cosmological understanding. The opening tablet describes the primordial state before creation, when only Apsu, representing fresh water, and Tiamat, representing salt water, existed in an undifferentiated unity. The text states that at this time no gods had been named and no destinies determined, indicating a pre-creation condition before the emergence of the divine hierarchies that would later govern cosmic order. This description parallels creation accounts from other ancient traditions that describe primordial unity preceding differentiation and organization. From the mingling of Apsu and Tiamat emerged the first divine generation, including Lammu and Lahamu, followed by Ansha and Kisha, and then Anu and his generation. The text explicitly describes these emergences as occurring in chronological sequence, with specific time periods separating each generation. The mathematical precision with which these generational intervals are described suggests the text preserves chronological information rather than presenting purely symbolic genealogy. The use of astronomical terminology to describe temporal relationships indicates that the generational transitions correspond to specific celestial cycles. The conflict that drives the narrative begins when the younger gods disturb Apsu and Tiamat through their noise and activity. Apsu proposes to destroy the younger gods to restore primordial quiet, but is instead killed by Ea, one of the younger deities. This patricide provokes Tiamat to seek vengeance, leading to cosmic warfare between the primordial forces represented by Tiamat and her allies, and the younger gods led ultimately by Marduk. The description of this conflict includes specific details about weapons, battle tactics, and cosmic disturbances that some researchers have interpreted as preserving memories of actual celestial events, including asteroid impacts or cometary encounters. The defeat of Tiamat by Marduk forms the climax of the creation narrative, with Marduk splitting Tiamat's body to create heaven and earth and establishing the fundamental structure of the cosmos. The text describes how Marduk organized the celestial realm by assigning specific stars and constellations to different gods, establishing the calendar and creating astronomical cycles that would govern time measurement. The precision of these astronomical descriptions indicates detailed knowledge of celestial mechanics and suggests the text served not only mythological, but also astronomical and calendrical functions. The establishment of human civilization follows the cosmic ordering, with the text describing how Marduk created humans to serve the gods and established Babylon as the terrestrial center corresponding to the cosmic center established in heaven. The parallel between celestial and terrestrial organization reflects the fundamental Mesopotamian concept that earthly structures mirror cosmic patterns, a principle that governed temple construction, urban planning, and political organization throughout Mesopotamian history. The chronological framework preserved in the Enuma Elish extends beyond mythological time to incorporate astronomical cycles that enable correlation with historical periods. References to specific planetary positions, stellar configurations, and calendrical relationships provide chronological anchors that researchers have used to date the cosmic events described in the text. These correlations suggest that the transition from Tiamat's chaos to Marduk's ordered cosmos preserves traditions of actual historical transitions, possibly reflecting the displacement of older Sumerian divine hierarchies by Babylonian religious systems during the 2nd millennium BC. The Osirian at Abydos in Egypt, traditionally associated with the 19th dynasty pharaoh Seti I, demonstrates construction techniques and architectural principles that differ significantly from known 19th dynasty building methods. The massive granite blocks, some weighing over 100 tons, are fitted together without mortar, using the same precision jointing techniques found at other enigmatic Egyptian sites. The structure's position 20 metres below ground level and its evident age weathering have led some researchers to propose that it represents a much earlier construction that was later incorporated into Seti's temple complex. The Osirion is located immediately behind Seti's temple at Abydos, connected to the main temple through a long descending passageway, but separated in architectural style and construction technique. The structure was discovered in 1903 by Margaret Murray and fully excavated between 1912 and 1914 by Edward Naville and his team. The excavation revealed a massive rectangular structure built from enormous blocks of red granite and sandstone, with a central hall surrounded by smaller chambers and a mysterious pool arrangement that has generated extensive scholarly debate about the building's original function. The central hall measures approximately 30 metres by 20 metres and originally supported a roof structure of massive granite beams resting on 10 monolithic granite pillars arranged in 2 rows of 5. The pillars, carved from single blocks of Aswan granite, stand approximately 4 metres high and demonstrate the same precise right-angle corners and smooth surface, finishing found at sites like the Valley Temple at Giza. The granite beams that spanned between pillars weigh an estimated 20 to 40 tons each and show evidence of having been positioned with precision that minimized gaps between adjacent elements. The construction techniques evident in the Osirion differ markedly from typical 19th dynasty temple architecture. While Seti's temple above employs conventional New Kingdom building methods, including stone courses of manageable size set with mortar and decorated with elaborate relief carvings, the Osirion uses megalithic construction with massive blocks fitted together through precision, jointing without mortar or binding agents. This architectural discontinuity suggests that the two structures represent different construction traditions despite their physical proximity and traditional attribution to the same pharaoh. The structure's depth below ground level presents chronological puzzles that conventional dating struggles to resolve. The floor of the Osirion sits approximately 20 metres below the current ground surface and 11 metres below the floor level of Seti's temple. This extreme depth required massive excavation efforts to reach bedrock, and suggests either that the structure was built at ground level during a period when the Abydos site stood significantly lower than its current elevation, or that the builders deliberately excavated to great depth for functional or symbolic reasons. The accumulation of 11 metres of deposition between the Osirion floor and Seti's temple floor would require thousands of years under normal sedimentation rates, arguing for much greater antiquity than the 19th dynasty construction date. Weathering analysis of the granite blocks reveals erosion patterns consistent with prolonged exposure to moisture and possibly to conditions significantly wetter than those experienced at Abydos during the historical period. The weathering appears on blocks that would have been protected from the elements if the structure had always been roofed as conventional interpretation assumes. The presence of this weathering suggests the blocks experienced extended exposure before roof installation, or that they weathered during a period when the structure stood incomplete or damaged. The function of the Osirion remains debated, with conventional interpretation identifying it as a cenotaph or symbolic tomb for Osiris, the god of death and resurrection, central to Egyptian religious beliefs. This interpretation draws support from the structure's name, assigned during excavation based on its association with Osiris worship at Abydos, and from the presence of mortuary symbolism in texts carved into later additions to the structure. However, the building's design, particularly its pool arrangements and apparent hydraulic engineering, suggests possible alternative functions including ritual purification, astronomical observation, or symbolic representation of the primordial mound emerging from the waters of creation. The architectural parallels between the Osirion and other enigmatic structures, including the Valley Temple at Giza, and the granite structures within the pyramid complexes strengthen arguments for a common construction tradition operating outside the conventional chronology of Egyptian architecture. These sites share megalithic construction techniques, precision granite working, absence of hieroglyphic inscriptions in original construction phases, and architectural simplicity that contrasts with the elaborate decoration characteristic of most Egyptian temples. The consistency of these shared features across multiple sites suggests the existence of a sophisticated construction tradition whose origins and dating remain incompletely understood. Hindu mythological texts describe the Daityas and Danavas as races of powerful beings who inhabited Earth during previous cosmic cycles and possessed advanced knowledge of architecture, astronomy, and warfare. The Mahabharata and various Puranas portray these beings not as demons in the Western sense, but as technologically sophisticated races who contested with the Devas for control of Earth and its resources. The texts describe their cities as containing great libraries, astronomical observatories, and workshops capable of producing weapons and tools that operated through principles the texts struggle to explain. The Daityas and Danavas appear throughout Hindu literature as the offspring of the sage Kashyapa through different wives, with the Daityas descending from Diti and the Danavas from Danu. While later Hindu tradition often portrays these beings as antagonists to the Devas or gods, careful reading of the source texts reveals a more nuanced picture of technologically advanced civilizations engaged in political and military competition rather than cosmic evil opposing cosmic good. The Mahabharata describes numerous Daitya and Danava rulers who possessed kingdoms, armies, and sophisticated urban centers that rivaled or exceeded those of the Devas. The cities of the Daityas receive detailed description in multiple Puranic texts, with particular attention to their architectural magnificence and technological capabilities. The Bhagavata Purana describes the city of Hiranyapura as containing palaces constructed from gold and precious stones, with walls that could withstand attacks from divine weapons and gates that opened and closed through mechanical means requiring no manual operation. The text indicates that the city incorporated defensive technologies including energy barriers that could repel approaching enemies and weapon systems capable of targeting aerial vehicles. The astronomical knowledge attributed to the Daityas and Danavas appears throughout descriptions of their urban centers and cultural achievements. The Vishnu Purana describes observatories within Danava cities where celestial movements were tracked with precision that enabled prediction of eclipses, planetary conjunctions, and other astronomical phenomena. The text indicates that Danava astronomers understood the precession of the equinoxes and calculated cosmic cycles extending across millions of years, knowledge that they encoded in permanent records preserved in their great libraries. The libraries of the Daityas receive particular mention in several texts as repositories of accumulated knowledge from previous cosmic cycles. The Mahabharata describes how the Danava architect Maya possessed extensive libraries containing technical manuals, astronomical tables, and architectural treatises that preserved information from earlier ages of the world. When the Pandava brothers sought to build their magnificent assembly hall at Indraprastha, they enlisted Maya's assistance specifically because he possessed access to this ancient knowledge that exceeded the capabilities of contemporary human builders. The weapons technology attributed to the Daityas and Danavas includes descriptions of devices that operated through principles resembling modern energy weapons, missile systems, and directed energy technologies. The Mahabharata's accounts of the wars between the Devas and Asuras, a term encompassing both Daityas and Danavas, describe weapons capable of striking targets at great distances, destroying entire armies with single discharges, and creating environmental effects including storms, earthquakes, and firestorms. The text refers to these weapons using terms like Agneya Astra, fiery weapons, and Vayavya Astra, wind weapons, suggesting they operated through manipulation of natural forces rather than simple mechanical means. The most detailed technological description appears in the account of the Vimanas, aerial vehicles used by both Devas and Asuras for transportation and warfare. The Vaimanika Shastra, a text attributed to the sage Bharadvaja, but preserved in 20th century copies, provides extensive technical specifications for different types of Vimanas, including their construction materials, power systems, and operational capabilities. While scholars debate the antiquity and authenticity of this specific text, references to flying vehicles appear throughout undisputed ancient Hindu literature, including the Ramayana and Mahabharata, suggesting that traditions of advanced aerial technology formed part of mainstream Hindu cultural memory. The Daitya architect Maya receives particular attention across multiple texts as a preserver and transmitter of ancient technical knowledge. The Mahabharata describes how Maya survived the destruction of the Daitya civilizations and later assisted the Pandavas by sharing his preserved knowledge. His construction of the Sabha assembly hall at Indraprastha incorporated architectural principles and engineering techniques that amazed contemporary observers, including a floor so perfectly polished that it appeared to be water, causing visitors to lift their garments to avoid getting wet. This description suggests advanced understanding of material science and surface finishing techniques. The ultimate fate of the Daitya and Danava civilizations forms a recurring theme in the Puranic literature, with texts describing their destruction through a combination of warfare with the Devas and catastrophic natural events. The Bhagavata Purana describes how the great Daitya cities were destroyed by cosmic weapons that set the earth ablaze and caused the oceans to rise and submerge vast territories. The survivors of these catastrophes either retreated to hidden strongholds beneath the earth and under the oceans, or were integrated into subsequent civilizations, preserving fragments of their advanced knowledge while losing the institutional structures that had originally developed and maintained these technologies. Recent acoustic analysis of chambers within Neolithic passage tombs in Ireland and Scotland has revealed that these structures were designed with sophisticated understanding of sound resonance and frequency amplification. Research conducted at Newgrange by Paul Devereux demonstrated that the chamber produces resonance at frequencies between 95 and 120 Hz, a range that corresponds to the frequency of the adult male voice and has measurable effects on human consciousness. The precision required to design chambers with specific acoustic properties suggests the builders possessed advanced knowledge of sound physics and psychoacoustic effects. Newgrange, located in County Meath, Ireland, dates to approximately 3200 BC and represents one of the most sophisticated examples of Neolithic architecture in Western Europe. The passage tomb consists of a long corridor, approximately 19 meters in length, leading to a cruciform chamber with a corbelled roof that rises to a height of nearly 6 meters. The entire structure is covered by a massive circular mound, approximately 85 meters in diameter, constructed from alternating layers of earth and stones that have proven remarkably effective at preserving the internal chambers from water infiltration. The acoustic research conducted by Devereux and his team involved systematic measurement of the chamber's resonance characteristics using sound generation equipment and spectrum analyzers. The researchers discovered that the chamber exhibits strong resonance at frequencies centered around 110 Hz, with the resonance effect most pronounced when sound is generated from specific positions within the chamber. This resonant frequency falls within the range of the adult male voice, particularly when producing low-pitched vocalizations or chanting. The physiological and psychological effects of sound at these frequencies have been documented through multiple research studies. Exposure to sound in the 95 to 120 Hz range has been shown to affect brainwave patterns, inducing states similar to those observed during deep meditation or trance. Research by cognitive neuroscientist Ian Cook at UCLA demonstrated that exposure to 110 Hz tones shifts brain activity from the left temporal region associated with language processing to the right temporal region associated with intuition, creativity, and emotional processing. This neurological shift could explain the use of such chambers for ritual or mystical experiences. The architectural features that create these acoustic properties demonstrate sophisticated understanding of sound physics and resonance engineering. The chamber dimensions, wall surface textures, and ceiling geometry work together to enhance specific frequencies while dampening others. The corbelled ceiling construction, which steps inward in successive layers until the roof closes, creates a resonant cavity whose dimensions determine the frequencies that will be amplified. The precision required to design chambers with target resonance characteristics requires either extensive trial and error construction, theoretical understanding of acoustic principles, or inheritance of design knowledge from earlier sources. Similar acoustic properties have been documented at other Neolithic sites throughout the British Isles and continental Europe. The passage tomb at Maeshowe in Orkney, Scotland, exhibits resonance characteristics comparable to those at Newgrange, with strong amplification of frequencies between 100 and 120 Hz. Research at Campster Round in Caithness, Scotland, revealed that the chamber resonates most strongly when sound is generated at the intersection of the main passage and chamber, suggesting deliberate acoustic design focused on specific ceremonial positions. The consistency of acoustic properties across multiple, independently constructed sites, separated by hundreds of kilometers, suggests either independent discovery of similar design principles or transmission of acoustic knowledge through cultural networks connecting different Neolithic communities. The mathematical relationships between chamber dimensions, resonance frequencies, and human vocal ranges indicate understanding of proportional systems that optimize acoustic effects. These proportional relationships appear to follow patterns similar to musical harmonics, suggesting that Neolithic builders possessed knowledge of mathematical relationships governing sound production and propagation. Recent experiments have explored the potential uses of these acoustic properties in ritual contexts. Researchers have documented that sustained chanting at resonant frequencies within these chambers creates powerful psychoacoustic effects, including alterations in perception, heightened emotional states, and experiences of auditory hallucination where additional sounds seem to emerge from the resonating chamber. These effects could have been intentionally employed in initiation ceremonies, healing rituals, or mystical experiences designed to alter consciousness and create powerful spiritual encounters. The architectural investment required to construct these acoustically sophisticated chambers indicates that sound properties were considered essential features rather than incidental byproducts of structural design. The labour required to quarry, transport, and position the massive stones, combined with the precision needed to achieve specific acoustic targets, suggests that Neolithic communities valued these acoustic spaces sufficiently to dedicate substantial resources to their construction. This cultural prioritization of acoustic engineering implies sophisticated understanding of sound's effects on human consciousness and its potential applications in religious and social contexts. The Sumerian king list's description of antediluvian rulers with reigns measuring in tens of thousands of years has traditionally been dismissed as mythological exaggeration, yet the mathematical precision with which these numbers are recorded and their consistent appearance across multiple independent copies suggests they encode actual information rather than random invention. Analysis of the reign lengths reveals they are based on multiples of 3600, a number the Sumerians called a sar, and that the total duration of antediluvian rulership corresponds to specific astronomical cycles, including multiple precessional periods. The Sumerian king list survives in multiple copies dating from different periods, with the most complete version preserved on the Weld-Blundell prism housed in the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford. This clay prism, dating to approximately 2000 BC, presents a comprehensive chronology, beginning with the line after the kingship descended from heaven. The kingship was in Eridu. The text then lists rulers and their reign lengths in sequential order, maintaining consistent numerical notation and grammatical structures that indicate systematic record-keeping rather than mythological composition. The antediluvian section of the king list attributes extraordinarily long reigns to 8 rulers who governed 5 cities before the flood. Alulim of Eridu is credited with a reign of 28,800 years, Alalgar of Eridu with 36,000 years, Enmanluana of Bad Tibera with 43,200 years, Enmangalana of Bad Tibera with 28,800 years, the divine Dumuzi of Bad Tibera with 36,000 years, Ensipadzidana of Larak with 28,800 years, Enmandurana of Sippar with 21,000 years, and finally Ubatutu of Shurupak with 18,600 years. The total duration of these 8 reigns sums to 241,200 years. The mathematical structure underlying these reign lengths becomes apparent through numerical analysis. Each reign length is precisely divisible by 3600, the SAR unit that formed a fundamental component of Sumerian mathematical and astronomical calculations. Alulim's reign of 28,800 years equals 8 SAR, Alalgar's 36,000 years equals 10 SAR, Enmanluana's 43,200 years equals 12 SAR, and so forth. This consistent use of SAR multiples indicates the numbers were calculated according to a systematic formula rather than invented arbitrarily. The SAR unit itself connects to astronomical observations and cycles. The number 3600 approximates 100 times the length of a lunisolar calendar year and represents a significant astronomical period in Mesopotamian calculation systems. Some researchers have proposed that the SAR corresponds to the orbital period of a hypothetical planet or long-period comet, though no celestial object with a 3600-year orbit has been confirmed through modern astronomy. Alternative interpretations suggest the SAR might represent an idealized astronomical unit used for theoretical calculations, rather than observation of a specific celestial phenomenon. The total duration of antediluvian rulership, 241,200 years, corresponds to multiple cycles of astronomical significance. This period equals 67 complete SAR units, and encompasses approximately 9 complete precessional cycles of 25,920 years each. The mathematical relationship between the antediluvian chronology and precessional cycles suggests that Sumerian chronographers understood long-term astronomical phenomena and encoded this knowledge in their historical records. The precision of this correlation argues against coincidence and supports the interpretation that the king list preserves sophisticated astronomical calculations. Post-Diluvian reign lengths in the king list show systematic reduction from the extraordinary durations attributed to antediluvian rulers, following a pattern of gradual normalization toward historically plausible reign lengths. The immediate post-flood rulers are credited with reigns measuring in thousands or hundreds of years, while later rulers show progressively shorter reigns that eventually approach the 20 to 40-year averages typical of historical monarchies. This gradual transition from mythological to historical timescales could represent preservation of actual chronological traditions that extended deep into prehistory. The consistency of the antediluvian chronology across multiple independent copies of the king list argues against its dismissal as scribal error or later invention. The well-Blundell prism, the Sumerian king list from Nippur, fragments from Ur, and Babylonian copies all preserve identical or nearly identical reign lengths for the antediluvian rulers, despite being copied at different times and locations. This textual stability indicates that the tradition was well established and carefully maintained across centuries of transmission. The astronomical interpretation of these chronologies receives support from parallel traditions in other ancient cultures. Hindu chronologies describing cosmic cycles measured in hundreds of thousands or millions of years employ similar mathematical structures based on multiplicative relationships between fundamental time units. Egyptian chronologies attributing extended reigns to divine or semi-divine rulers show comparable patterns of systematically calculated durations. The cross-cultural consistency of these extended chronologies suggests they represent sophisticated systems for encoding astronomical and cosmological knowledge rather than primitive mythological fantasies. Archaeological investigation of ancient mining sites in South Africa, particularly in the Mpumalanga and Limpopo provinces, has revealed evidence of mining activities that radiocarbon dating places between 40,000 and 100,000 years ago. The scale of these operations, which include shaft mining rather than simple surface collection, indicates organized labor forces and technical knowledge of ore identification and extraction that significantly predates the conventional timeline for the development of mining technology. The mining sites cluster in regions known for high-grade iron ore, gold deposits, and other valuable minerals that have supported modern mining operations. The ancient workings, many of which were discovered during modern mining exploration and development, consist of networks of shafts, galleries, and excavation chambers that extend significant distances underground. The engineering required for these underground operations included ventilation planning, structural support to prevent collapse, water management to handle underground seepage, and lighting systems to enable work in complete darkness. One of the most extensively documented ancient mining complexes is located near the modern town of Ngwenya in Swaziland, where mining for red ochre hematite has been confirmed through radiocarbon dating to extend back at least 43,000 years. The excavations at this site revealed mining tools including stone hammers, picks, and wedges used to extract ore from the rock matrix. The presence of these tools in association with extracted ore and mining debris confirms that the site represents deliberate mining operations rather than natural geological features or later disturbance of prehistoric deposits. The scale of material removal at some sites indicates sustained mining operations involving substantial labor investments. Estimates based on the volume of excavated material suggest that thousands of tons of ore were extracted from certain ancient mining complexes. This level of production requires organized labor coordination, systematic planning, and motivation sufficient to sustain multi-generational mining projects. The social organization necessary to mobilize and maintain such labor forces challenges conventional models of human social development during the Middle Paleolithic period. The technical knowledge demonstrated by these mining operations includes the ability to identify ore deposits through prospecting techniques, assess ore quality, select appropriate extraction methods for different geological conditions, and process extracted material to separate valuable minerals from waste rock. Some sites show evidence of fire setting techniques where heating rock surfaces caused thermal fracturing that facilitated extraction. The controlled application of fire for rock breaking requires understanding of thermal expansion properties and safety procedures to prevent uncontrolled fires in underground environments. Recent research has employed advanced dating techniques including optically stimulated luminescence and uranium-thorium dating to establish more precise chronologies for these mining activities. Studies conducted by researchers from the University of the Witwatersrand and international collaborators have confirmed occupation and mining at multiple sites extending beyond 40,000 years ago, with some preliminary results suggesting possible mining activities as early as 100,000 years before present. These dates place ancient African mining operations contemporaneous with, or earlier than the earliest evidence for modern human migration out of Africa. The purpose of these ancient mining operations remains debated, with different minerals apparently targeted at different sites and time periods. Red ochre mining appears particularly ancient and widespread, with ochre used for symbolic, artistic, and possibly utilitarian purposes in prehistoric African cultures. The extraction of other minerals, including iron ore, copper, and gold, suggests economic motivations and technological applications that conventional archaeology has not traditionally attributed to Middle Paleolithic populations. The diversity of minerals exploited indicates sophisticated knowledge of mineral properties and their potential applications. The geographical distribution of ancient mining sites corresponds to regions that show early evidence for complex human behaviours, including symbolic thinking, advanced tool manufacture, and long-distance trade networks. The correlation between mining activity and other indicators of cognitive sophistication suggests that these mining operations formed part of broader cultural systems that included technological innovation, economic organisation, and possibly metallurgical processing. While direct evidence for metal smelting contemporary with the oldest mining remains elusive, the presence of sustained mining operations raises questions about whether prehistoric populations developed metallurgical capabilities earlier than conventional timelines recognise. The Dendera zodiac, a bas-relief carved on the ceiling of a chamber in the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, depicts the positions of constellations and includes symbols representing the precession of the equinoxes. Analysis of the astronomical positions shown in the zodiac by archaeoastronomers indicates it represents stellar configurations from approximately 10,500 BC, yet the temple structure itself dates to the Ptolemaic period. This discrepancy suggests the zodiac preserves astronomical knowledge from a much earlier period that was copied or commemorated in the later temple construction. The zodiac occupies the ceiling of a small chapel on the roof of the Hathor temple at Dendera, carved in bas-relief on sandstone slabs that were later removed and transported to France, where they now reside in the Louvre Museum. The original zodiac has been replaced in situ with a plaster cast that preserves the ability to study the relief's details at the temple site. The sculpture dates to the final years of Ptolemaic rule in Egypt, with hieroglyphic inscriptions identifying the work as commissioned during the reign of Cleopatra VII or shortly before the Roman conquest. The circular zodiac depicts the familiar constellations of the zodiac arranged in their traditional sequence, along with various Egyptian deities, astronomical symbols, and representations of celestial phenomena. The artistic style combines Greek zodiacal iconography with Egyptian religious symbolism, reflecting the cultural synthesis characteristic of Ptolemaic period art. However, the astronomical information encoded in the constellation positions differs significantly from the stellar configurations that would have been visible from Egypt during the Ptolemaic period. Analysis by archaeoastronomer Jane Sellers and others revealed that the zodiac depicts the spring equinox point positioned in the constellation Gemini, while the summer solstice point appears in Virgo, the autumn equinox in Sagittarius, and the winter solstice in Pisces. These positions do not match the astronomical conditions during the Ptolemaic period when the relief was carved. In approximately 50 BC, the spring equinox occurred in Aries due to precessional movement, placing all equinox and solstice points one or two constellations shifted from the positions shown in the Dendera zodiac. Working backward through precessional calculations, researchers determined that the stellar positions depicted in the zodiac correspond most closely to conditions that prevailed approximately 10,500 years ago, during the period when the spring equinox transitioned from Cancer into Gemini. This date places the original astronomical observations that informed the zodiac's design in the late Paleolithic or early Neolithic period, thousands of years before the construction of the Dendera temple or even the emergence of dynastic Egyptian civilization. The possibility that Ptolemaic sculptors copied the zodiac from much earlier source materials receive support from Egyptian textual traditions, emphasizing the preservation and copying of ancient sacred knowledge. The Edfu texts explicitly describe how temple inscriptions were created by copying from ancient papyri and leather scrolls that dated from earlier periods. The Dendera zodiac could represent a similar case of Ptolemaic-era artists reproducing an ancient astronomical diagram whose significance they understood but whose origins lay in Egypt's remote past. Alternative interpretations of the zodiacal positions have been proposed, including the suggestion that the relief depicts a specific historical date significant in Egyptian religious chronology rather than representing contemporary astronomical conditions. Some researchers have proposed that the zodiac commemorates the mythological date of temple foundation or the birth of a deity, with the stellar positions calculated backward to represent conditions during this mythologically significant epoch. This interpretation would explain both the archism of the astronomical data and the Ptolemaic creation date of the relief itself. The precession of the equinoxes, the astronomical phenomenon that causes the shifting of constellation positions relative to the equinox and solstice points, requires sophisticated long-term astronomical observation to detect and measure. The precessional cycle completes one full rotation approximately every 25,920 years, meaning that the equinox point shifts through one zodiacal constellation approximately every 2,160 years. Detecting this slow movement requires comparing astronomical observations separated by centuries or millennia, indicating that ancient astronomers maintained continuous observational traditions across numerous generations. The encoding of precessional information in the Dendera zodiac suggests that Egyptian astronomical knowledge included understanding of this subtle long-term celestial motion. The depiction of equinox and solstice positions from a specific past epoch indicates not only that ancient astronomers observed precession, but that they calculated its effects across thousands of years of history. This level of astronomical sophistication equals or exceeds the capabilities attributed to Greek astronomers like Hipparchus, who is conventionally credited with discovering precession in the 2nd century BC. Megalithic walls constructed from massive polygonal blocks appear at ancient sites across multiple continents, including Peru, Lebanon, Italy, and Greece. These Cyclopean walls demonstrate construction techniques that create earthquake-resistant structures through precise interlocking of irregularly shaped stones weighing many tons. Additionally, numerous prehistoric hill forts in Scotland and other regions show evidence of vitrification, where stone walls have been subjected to temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius, fusing the stones into glass-like masses through processes that remain unexplained. The term Cyclopean derives from ancient Greek traditions attributing megalithic walls to the Cyclopes, mythological giants whose strength enabled the manipulation of massive stones beyond human capabilities. While modern archaeology rejects the literal interpretation of these legends, the technical challenges posed by Cyclopean construction remain formidable even with contemporary equipment. The walls demonstrate construction principles that distribute structural loads, accommodate seismic displacement, and maintain stability across millennia despite earthquakes, erosion, and human interference. The fortress walls at Sacsayhuaman overlooking Cusco in Peru exemplify the most sophisticated Cyclopean construction techniques. The walls consist of limestone blocks weighing between 20 and 200 tons, fitted together with precision that prevents insertion of paper between adjacent stones, despite the irregular polygonal shapes of individual blocks. The largest block, estimated at 360 tons, displays complex three-dimensional geometry, with multiple surfaces precisely shaped to interlock with surrounding stones. The technical expertise required to create these precisely fitting, irregular polygons exceeds the challenge of cutting regular rectangular blocks, as each stone requires custom shaping to match its unique position within the wall. The construction sequence for Cyclopean walls presents logistical puzzles that conventional explanations struggle to address adequately. Each irregularly shaped block must be positioned temporarily, its final location determined, the surrounding context measured and recorded, the block removed for custom shaping, the shaping completed with precision sufficient to ensure proper fit, and finally the finished block returned and installed in its designated position. This process becomes exponentially more complex as wall construction proceeds, and each new block must fit precisely within the three-dimensional puzzle created by previously installed stones. The seismic resistance demonstrated by Cyclopean walls has attracted attention from structural engineers studying earthquake-resistant design principles. The irregular polygonal shapes create multiple contact surfaces between adjacent blocks, distributing seismic loads across complex interfaces that prevent the concentration of stress at specific points. Additionally, the slight gaps and variation in contact surfaces allow minimal movement during seismic events, enabling the walls to flex and accommodate ground motion without catastrophic failure. Modern seismic analysis has confirmed that Cyclopean walls employ principles that contemporary earthquake engineering recognizes as optimal for seismic resistance. Similar Cyclopean construction appears at Baalbek in Lebanon, where the temple platform incorporates stones including the famous trilithon blocks, 3 massive stones weighing an estimated 800 to 1,000 tons each. These blocks were quarried approximately 1 kilometre from their final installation site and transported across uneven terrain, before being lifted and positioned with precision in the temple foundation. The nearby stone of the pregnant woman, a quarried block estimated at 1,000 tons that was never transported to the temple, provides evidence of the quarrying techniques employed, showing deep trenches cut around the block's perimeter to separate it from the bedrock matrix. Cyclopean walls at Mycenae and Tiryns in Greece demonstrate similar construction principles, adapted to local geological conditions and available stone types. The Lion Gate at Mycenae, dating to approximately 1300 BC, incorporates massive limestone blocks fitted together using techniques that parallel those found in Peru, despite the geographical separation and absence of documented contact between these cultures. The architectural consistency suggests either independent discovery of optimal construction methods or preservation and transmission of building knowledge through cultural channels that conventional archaeology has not fully documented. The vitrified forts scattered throughout Scotland and other regions of northern Europe present different technical mysteries involving extreme heat application to stone structures. More than 60 hill forts in Scotland show evidence of vitrification, where stone walls have been heated to temperatures exceeding 1,000 to 1,200 degrees Celsius, causing the stones to partially melt and fuse into glass-like masses. The vitrified material bonds adjacent stones into solid masses that in some cases have proven more durable than the original dry stone construction. The heat required for vitrification exceeds what conventional explanations involving accidental fires or deliberate destruction can easily explain. Wood fires, even when intensified through deliberate fueling and wind assistance, typically reach temperatures of 600 to 800 degrees Celsius, insufficient to cause the observed vitrification effects. The presence of vitrified material throughout wall structures rather than only on exposed surfaces suggests sustained heating at extreme temperatures, requiring fuel sources and combustion control beyond what simple wood fires would provide. Several researchers have proposed that vitrification resulted from deliberate engineering intended to strengthen wall structures, though the fuel requirements and technical challenges make this explanation problematic. Alternative theories suggest that vitrification occurred during destruction events involving advanced weaponry or unusual atmospheric phenomena, though such explanations remain speculative. The distribution of vitrified forts across northern Europe and parts of the Middle East suggests the phenomenon resulted from processes that operated across wide geographical areas during specific historical periods. Recent analysis of vitrified materials using modern materials science techniques has revealed additional puzzles regarding the formation conditions. Examination of the fused stone shows evidence of extremely rapid heating, followed by equally rapid cooling, creating material structures distinct from those produced by gradual heating and cooling cycles. The presence of microscopic metallic spheres within some vitrified materials suggests temperatures and chemical conditions that would not occur in normal combustion processes, raising questions about the energy sources involved in creating these structures. The colossal Olmec stone heads of ancient Mexico, carved from single basalt blocks weighing up to 25 tons, display facial features that numerous anthropologists have noted show African characteristics rather than typical Mesoamerican physiognomy. This observation, combined with evidence of early transoceanic botanical transfers and shared cultural elements between Old and New World civilizations, suggests contact between continents during periods before such voyages were supposedly technologically feasible. The Olmec civilization flourished along the Gulf Coast of Mexico from approximately 1200 to 400 BC, establishing the first complex society in Mesoamerica and creating artistic and architectural traditions that influenced all subsequent Mesoamerican cultures. The colossal heads, 17 of which have been discovered at sites including San Lorenzo, La Venta, Tres Zapotes, and Rancho La Cobata, represent the most iconic Olmec artistic achievement. Each head stands between 1.5 and 3.4 meters in height and weighs between 6 and 50 tons, carved from basalt boulders quarried in the Tuxtla Mountains, approximately 80 kilometers from the major Olmec centers. The facial features depicted on the colossal heads have generated scholarly debate since their discovery, with some researchers noting characteristics including broad noses, full lips, and facial proportions that differ from indigenous Mesoamerican populations but resemble African physiognomy. These observations have led to proposals of transoceanic contact between West Africa and Mesoamerica during the pre-Columbian period, though such theories remain controversial within mainstream archaeology. The helmets or headdresses worn by the figures on the colossal heads display designs that some researchers have compared to protective headgear, though conventional interpretation identifies them as ritual regalia or symbols of rank. Evidence for transoceanic contact between the Old and New Worlds during pre-Columbian periods extends beyond the physiognomic observations to include botanical, linguistic, and cultural elements that appear in both regions without clear independent origin. The presence of cotton species in both the Old and New Worlds that show genetic evidence of hybridization between Asian and American varieties suggests either transoceanic plant transfer or unknown mechanisms of genetic exchange. Similarly, the sweet potato, a plant native to South America, appears in Polynesian cultivation before European contact, documented through linguistic evidence showing that Polynesian words for the plant derive from South American indigenous terms. Cocaine and nicotine, alkaloids found exclusively in New World plants, have been detected in Egyptian mummies through chemical analysis conducted by German toxicologist Svetlana Balabanova and published in 1992. The presence of these compounds in Egyptian remains dating from 1000 BC onward has generated extensive controversy, with critics proposing contamination or alternative alkaloid sources, while supporters argue the findings demonstrate transoceanic trade networks operating during the Bronze Age. Additional testing has confirmed the original findings in multiple mummies from different collections, complicating attempts to explain the results through contamination or procedural error. Cultural parallels between Old and New World civilizations include architectural features, astronomical knowledge, and mythological themes that show striking similarities despite geographical separation. Pyramid construction appears independently in Egypt, Mesopotamia, Mesoamerica, and other regions, employing similar architectural principles and often incorporating comparable astronomical alignments. The precision of astronomical knowledge demonstrated by both Mayan and ancient Near Eastern civilizations, including understanding of precessional cycles and eclipse prediction, suggests either independent development of sophisticated observational astronomy or transmission of astronomical knowledge through contact networks. The technology required for transoceanic voyages during the Bronze Age or earlier periods has been demonstrated through experimental archaeology, most notably Thor Heyerdahl's successful crossings of the Atlantic in the papyrus reed boat Ra-2 and the Pacific in the balsa raft Kon-Tiki. These expeditions proved that watercraft constructed using ancient materials and techniques could complete transoceanic voyages, establishing the technological feasibility, if not the historical reality, of pre-Columbian contact. The consistent prevailing winds and ocean currents of the Atlantic would have facilitated eastward crossings from Africa to South America, while return voyages against prevailing conditions would have been more challenging but not impossible. Linguistic evidence provides additional suggestive connections between Old and New World populations, though such evidence remains more controversial and difficult to verify than archaeological or botanical findings. Some researchers have identified apparent cognates between Old World and New World languages, including similarities between ancient Egyptian, Sumerian, and various Native American language families. While mainstream historical linguistics generally rejects these connections as coincidental or the result of flawed comparative methods, the consistent identification of such parallels by independent researchers working with different language families suggests the topic merits continued investigation. The mystery schools of Egypt, Greece, and the ancient Near East functioned not merely as religious institutions, but as repositories for scientific and technical knowledge inherited from earlier civilizations. The curriculum of these schools, as documented in surviving texts and inscriptions, included advanced mathematics, astronomy, acoustics, and engineering principles that were transmitted through carefully structured initiation systems designed to ensure knowledge preservation across political and cultural disruptions. The Egyptian mystery schools operated within temple complexes throughout the Nile Valley, with major centers at Heliopolis, Memphis, Thebes, and other sacred sites. The educational programs conducted at these institutions extended far beyond religious ritual to encompass comprehensive training in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, architecture, and natural philosophy. Students progressed through multiple grades of initiation, each granting access to increasingly advanced knowledge and restricted texts. The Greek historian Herodotus, who visited Egypt in the 5th century BC, described encountering priests who possessed detailed knowledge of astronomy extending back thousands of years, preserved through continuous institutional transmission. The curriculum structure of Egyptian mystery schools followed systematic progressions from basic to advanced topics, ensuring students developed foundational understanding before accessing more sophisticated knowledge. Initial instruction covered practical mathematics, including arithmetic, geometry, and calculation methods necessary for commerce, construction, and astronomical observation. Advanced students received training in theoretical mathematics, including number theory, geometric proofs, and mathematical relationships underlying harmonic ratios and astronomical cycles. The most advanced initiates accessed secret archives containing ancient texts and technical manuals preserved from earlier periods. The mathematical knowledge preserved through mystery school traditions included geometric principles that would not be formally rediscovered until the classical Greek period or later. Egyptian mathematical papyri demonstrate understanding of geometric relationships, including the properties of similar triangles, methods for calculating areas and volumes of complex shapes, and approximations of transcendental constants, including pi. The precision of these mathematical techniques enabled accurate surveying for construction projects, astronomical calculations for calendar maintenance, and engineering designs for irrigation systems and architectural structures. Astronomical knowledge formed a central component of mystery school education, with initiates learning observational techniques, mathematical methods for calculating celestial positions, and theoretical frameworks for understanding cosmic order. The curriculum included training in the use of astronomical instruments, methods for determining stellar positions and planetary movements, techniques for predicting eclipses and other celestial phenomena, and systems for correlating astronomical observations with terrestrial events. The preservation of astronomical knowledge across multiple generations enabled the accumulation of observational data spanning centuries or millennia, facilitating the detection of subtle phenomena, including precessional motion. The Greek mysteries, particularly those conducted at Eleusis, Delphi, and other sacred sites, similarly combined religious ritual with systematic transmission of knowledge. The Eleusinian mysteries, which operated continuously for nearly 2,000 years from approximately 1500 BC to 400 AD, attracted initiates from throughout the classical world, including philosophers, political leaders, and intellectual figures who sought the wisdom preserved through these traditions. The strict secrecy maintained regarding the mysteries' inner teachings has prevented detailed knowledge of their content from entering the historical record, though references in philosophical texts suggest they incorporated teachings about cosmology, the nature of consciousness, and principles underlying material reality. The Pythagorean schools combined mathematical education with mystery tradition elements, teaching that numerical relationships governed cosmic order and that understanding these relationships provided insight into fundamental reality. The Pythagorean curriculum included advanced mathematics, musical theory based on harmonic ratios, astronomical observation and calculation, and philosophical teachings about the nature of number and its relationship to physical phenomena. The prohibition against revealing Pythagorean teachings to uninitiated persons created a protected knowledge system that preserved mathematical and scientific insights across generations of students. The transmission mechanisms employed by mystery schools ensured knowledge preservation through multiple redundant systems including written texts, oral teachings, architectural encoding in temple structures, and symbolic systems that embedded information in ritual practices and artistic works. This multi-layered approach to knowledge preservation protected against loss through any single failure mode, whether destruction of written records, interruption of oral transmission chains, or abandonment of sacred sites. The effectiveness of these preservation systems is demonstrated by the survival of sophisticated mathematical and astronomical knowledge through periods of political upheaval, cultural transformation, and religious conversion. The architectural integration of knowledge into temple structures created permanent records that could survive the destruction of portable texts and the interruption of educational traditions. Temple proportions, orientations, and decorative programs encoded mathematical relationships, astronomical data, and geographic information that could be recovered through careful measurement and analysis by future generations. The Great Pyramid's incorporation of mathematical constants, astronomical alignments, and geodetic relationships exemplifies this architectural approach to knowledge preservation, creating a monument that functions simultaneously as religious architecture and encoded scientific database. Fragmentary texts from various Mesopotamian sites preserve accounts of catastrophic events that ended the reign of the Ancient Ones and set the stage for the later Anunnaki dominance. These accounts describe cosmic warfare, celestial disturbances, and global catastrophes that align with geological evidence for major impact events and climate disruptions during the Younger Dryas period approximately 12,900 years ago. The texts indicate that the Anunnaki arrived during or immediately after these catastrophes, inheriting a devastated world and remnant populations that preserved fragmentary knowledge of the previous civilization. The most detailed account of these catastrophic events appears in tablet fragments from Nippur, designated as Collection CBS Supplementary Texts, which describe a period called the Time of the Great Destruction, when the earth shook and the sky burned. The text indicates that this destruction resulted from warfare between different factions of divine beings, with weapons described as causing the mountains to crumble and the seas to boil. The language employed differs markedly from typical mythological combat narratives, instead providing technical descriptions that suggest actual observation of catastrophic environmental events. The account describes celestial phenomena including stars falling from heaven, the darkening of the sun for extended periods, and changes in the paths of celestial bodies that disrupted the established order of the cosmos. These descriptions parallel geological and climatological evidence for the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, which proposes that fragments of a comet struck Earth approximately 12,900 years ago, causing widespread wildfires, atmospheric disruption, and rapid climate change. The impact markers including nanodiamonds, platinum anomalies, and shocked quartz have been identified in sediment layers corresponding to the Younger Dryas boundary across multiple continents. The environmental consequences described in the Mesopotamian texts align closely with the predicted effects of major impact events. The tablets describe prolonged darkness caused by atmospheric dust and smoke, dramatic temperature fluctuations, the failure of crops and vegetation, the death of large animals, and the flooding of coastal regions as ice sheets collapsed and ocean levels rose. These environmental catastrophes would have devastated existing civilizations and forced survivors to adapt to radically altered conditions or face extinction. The texts explicitly state that the Ancient One's civilization was destroyed during these catastrophes, with only scattered survivors remaining in isolated refuges. The description indicates that the Ancient Ones possessed advanced cities, sophisticated technologies, and accumulated knowledge that was largely lost during the destruction. The few survivors preserved fragments of this knowledge, passing it to subsequent populations through oral tradition and hidden repositories, but lacking the institutional structures and technological infrastructure necessary to maintain the full complexity of the previous civilization. The arrival of the Anunnaki is described as occurring in the immediate aftermath of the catastrophes, when the Earth remained damaged but had begun to stabilize. The texts portray the Anunnaki not as creators of civilization, but as reorganizers who encountered remnant human populations already possessing basic cultural and technological capabilities inherited from the Ancient Ones. The Anunnaki role involved providing guidance, technological assistance, and organizational structures that enabled these scattered survivors to rebuild civilization, though on a reduced scale compared to what had existed before the destruction. The chronological sequence preserved in these texts places the catastrophic destruction approximately 2 Shah periods before the beginning of Sumerian recorded history, equivalent to 7,200 years. This chronology places the destruction around 7200 BC, somewhat later than the Younger Dryas boundary, but potentially corresponding to subsequent impact events or environmental disruptions during the early Holocene period. The mathematical precision of this chronology suggests the texts preserve genuine temporal information rather than mythological timescales. References to technological remnants from the Ancient One's civilization appear throughout later Mesopotamian literature, describing discoveries of ancient artifacts, sealed chambers containing preserved knowledge, and abandoned cities whose construction exceeded contemporary capabilities. These references suggest that later Mesopotamian civilizations encountered physical evidence of their predecessors and attempted to understand and utilize whatever knowledge and technology could be recovered from these ancient sites. Recent advances in paleogenetic analysis have revealed evidence of ancient admixture events in human populations that conventional models of human evolution struggle to explain. DNA analysis of ancient remains from various sites has identified genetic contributions from populations that do not correspond to any known human lineage, leading some researchers to propose the existence of previously unrecognized human subspecies or populations. The geographical distribution and timing of these admixture events corresponds to periods and locations associated with the ancient ones in mythological traditions. The detection of archaic human DNA in modern populations became possible through advances in DNA extraction and sequencing technologies developed during the early 21st century. The successful sequencing of Neanderthal and Denisovan genomes revealed that modern non-African human populations carry genetic contributions from these archaic human lineages, demonstrating that interbreeding occurred when anatomically modern humans encountered these populations during migrations out of Africa. The percentages of archaic DNA in modern populations range from 1 to 4% for Neanderthal ancestry, and up to 5% for Denisovan ancestry in some Melanesian populations. However, recent genetic studies have identified additional archaic DNA signatures that do not match Neanderthal or Denisovan genomes, suggesting interbreeding with yet other unknown human lineages. Analysis published in 2019 identified genetic segments in West African populations showing characteristics of an unknown archaic hominin, nicknamed the ghost population, due to the absence of any fossil or archaeological evidence for its existence. The genetic signatures indicate this population diverged from the modern human lineage approximately 360,000 to 1 million years ago and contributed DNA to ancestors of current West African populations between 13,000 and 8,000 years ago. Similar ghost population signatures have been identified in other regions, including Southeast Asia, where genetic analysis suggests admixture with unknown archaic populations that were neither Neanderthal nor Denisovan. The genetic contributions show patterns indicating multiple distinct archaic lineages, each with different geographical distributions and different times of admixture with modern human populations. The complexity of these admixture patterns challenges simple linear models of human evolution and suggests a more intricate network of interactions between different hominin populations. The timing of some admixture events corresponds intriguingly with the chronologies preserved in ancient texts describing the ancient ones and their interactions with emerging human populations. The West African ghost population admixture dating to 13,000 to 8,000 years ago falls within the post-Younger Dryas period, when Mesopotamian texts describe the Anunnaki arriving and interacting with remnant populations. While genetic analysis cannot determine whether these archaic populations possessed advanced civilizations, the correlation between genetic and textual chronologies raises questions about whether mythological traditions might preserve memories of actual encounters between different human lineages. The geographical distribution of archaic admixture events shows concentrations in regions that ancient traditions identify as centers of advanced prehistoric civilizations. Denisovan ancestry reaches its highest levels in Melanesian and Australian Aboriginal populations, regions where oral traditions describe culture heroes and ancestral beings who taught fundamental skills and established cultural practices. The genetic evidence confirms the presence of non-modern human populations in these regions during the timeframe when mythological traditions place these teaching events. Morphological analysis of ancient skeletal remains has identified individuals displaying anatomical characteristics that differ from both modern human and known archaic human populations. Skulls from various archaeological sites show combinations of features including unusual cranial capacities, distinctive bone thickness patterns, and dental characteristics that do not fit neatly into established taxonomic categories. While some of these unusual features may result from normal human variation or pathological conditions, the consistent appearance of certain characteristic patterns across multiple, unrelated individuals suggests they might represent genuine population-level differences. The Paracas skulls from Peru exemplify these morphological anomalies, displaying elongated cranial shapes that some researchers attribute to artificial cranial deformation, while others propose may represent genetic differences. DNA analysis of Paracas skull samples has produced controversial results, with some studies claiming to identify unusual mitochondrial DNA sequences, while other researchers question the methodology and interpretation of these findings. The scientific debate surrounding these remains illustrates the challenges of integrating genetic evidence with morphological observations and mythological traditions. The implications of archaic admixture evidence extend beyond academic questions about human evolutionary history to encompass fundamental issues about the diversity of human populations in the past and the possibility that some of these populations possessed capabilities or knowledge that influenced subsequent civilizations. If archaic human populations survived until relatively recent prehistory and interacted with modern humans during periods when complex cultures were developing, their potential contributions to emerging civilizations deserve consideration. The correlation between genetic evidence and mythological traditions suggests that ancient texts describing interactions with non-human or semi-divine beings might preserve genuine historical memories expressed through culturally specific narrative frameworks. The convergence of evidence presented throughout this investigation points toward a profound reconsideration of human history and the development of civilization on Earth. The archaeological anomalies, textual traditions, astronomical knowledge, genetic signatures, and technological capabilities documented across multiple continents and millennia cannot be adequately explained through conventional models that depict human progress as a simple linear advancement from primitive origins to modern sophistication. Instead, the accumulated evidence suggests that advanced civilizations rose and fell during periods extending far deeper into prehistory than academic orthodoxy currently acknowledges, and that the Anunnaki described in Sumerian texts arrived not as the originators of civilization, but as successors to even more ancient powers whose reign preceded them by epochs measured in precessional cycles. The mathematical precision embedded in ancient chronologies, the sophisticated astronomical knowledge preserved in megalithic structures and temple orientations, the technological capabilities demonstrated in precision stonework and metallurgy, and the genetic evidence for admixture with unknown archaic populations collectively indicate that human development followed patterns more complex than gradual accumulation of knowledge from primitive beginnings. The cyclical model suggested by Hindu Manvantaras, Sumerian references to previous worlds, and Egyptian traditions of successive divine dynasties find support in geological evidence for catastrophic events that periodically reset civilizational development, forcing survivors to rebuild from fragmentary knowledge preserved through the destructions. The mystery schools and esoteric traditions that maintained astronomical, mathematical, and architectural knowledge across millennia functioned as essential preservation mechanisms that protected accumulated wisdom through periods of political collapse and cultural transformation. The encoding of knowledge in temple architecture, the transmission of information through carefully structured initiation systems, and the preservation of ancient texts in hidden repositories ensured that fragments of prehistoric knowledge survived to influence later civilizations. The sudden appearance of sophisticated capabilities in Sumerian, Egyptian, and other early civilizations reflects not spontaneous invention, but inheritance and application of knowledge systems developed during earlier cycles. The implications of this evidence extend beyond academic debates about chronology and cultural development to encompass fundamental questions about humanity's place in cosmic cycles of creation and destruction. If advanced civilizations have indeed risen and fallen multiple times throughout Earth's history, then the technological and cultural achievements of contemporary civilization represent not unprecedented human progress, but rather the latest iteration in recurring patterns of development. The recognition of these cyclical patterns carries urgent relevance for our current era, as humanity approaches technological capabilities that could either elevate consciousness to unprecedented levels or precipitate another catastrophic collapse. The lessons preserved in ancient texts describing the fall of the Ancient Ones through hubris, environmental destruction, and cosmic catastrophe provide warnings that contemporary civilization ignores at its peril. The evidence suggests that we stand at a threshold moment when accumulated knowledge approaches levels that previous civilizations attained before their destruction. Whether humanity can transcend the cyclical pattern of rise and fall depends upon our capacity to integrate technological advancement with wisdom, environmental stewardship with economic development, and individual advancement with collective well-being. The ancient knowledge preserved through mystery traditions and encoded in monuments worldwide offers guidance for navigating this critical transition, suggesting that conscious evolution beyond destructive patterns remains possible for those who comprehend the lessons written in stone, preserved in genetic memory, and encoded in the mythological traditions that describe the beings who ruled before the Anunnaki fell.